recognizing the problem earlier, watch for changes in your predator population. My husband's hobby is game cameras to him. But I want to tell you, they're a really useful tool. And we now have cameras that have cell service that you get a live photo right to your phone. And we set one up. We had a coyote that, actually he's a pretty big coyote. He's a coyote, but he's rather large for a coyote. And he was really checking the sheep out pretty hard. So I set this camera up around the corner where he was coming. As it turned out, by the time we got the camera out there, the dog had it all under control and he never came back again. But I'm just saying, these cameras are really pretty interesting and useful. Know that, like, pay attention to wildlife biology. This is the winter that wolves love, okay? They can get a lot of deer because the deer are impeded by the snow. And so they're going to be well fed and they're going to have a lot of puppies this spring. Next fall is when you're going to know it. Okay, that's when you're going to see a lot of depredations on livestock because the population is going to be large, and especially if we have a mild winter next year, so it's harder to get deer, they're going to be after your livestock. So know these things. Okay, next is when you have had a kill, you want to consolidate and move your livestock to safety, okay? And the reason is that predator has spent a lot of time. They didn't just stumble into your livestock and kill them the first moment they found them. That isn't really how it works. They have probably been scouting out your farm for a long time. And unfortunately, a picture I don't have here today is a game cam photo of a coyote watching me while I was doing chores, okay? He was sitting there. Actually, you can see him facing the house, okay? But they are scouting your farm for a long time before they take any livestock. And the best thing you can do right away is move out of that area because they know that area intimately, and keep them kind of off balance by moving your livestock to a new area. The other reason, though, to consolidate your livestock is because you can combine your livestock guard dogs. And I mentioned this morning how we used to have sheep in many different locations. And, you know, this is coming out of the advice of the 80s, okay? But the advice then was that you only needed one dog for a flock of sheep. And that was because there was a very low predator load during the 70s and 80s, and one dog is all it took, okay? But things have changed, and we now have, we've had packs of coyotes up to 6 on our farm. And, you know, I've mentioned wolves, of course, are naturally a pack animal. But when you bring all your animals together, you can now bring all the livestock guard dogs together, and they can do a much more effective job. In that time that we had those wolves in '99, we combined all the groups of sheep together with just 4 livestock guard dogs, and we stopped the problem overnight. Okay, so it makes a huge difference. I gotta take a drink, sorry.
Do the guard dogs get along usually?
Well, getting along, that we'll be going into that a little bit.
I'm sorry.
It's a long and difficult topic. Multiple dogs create a pack, and if that pack includes different ages and both sexes, and at least one intact male and one intact female, you will have a very effective force against wolves. And you know, all the early research, again, done during the 80s, before we really had the packs that we deal with. A former employee at the Clay Center pulled me over one time, and he said, you know what, you know, they were running 10,000 sheep. And they said, we always had some losses despite all the dogs, until we started leaving some of them intact. And then our losses went to 0. And the deal is that your wolves and your coyotes are going to regard an intact male and female pair as a much bigger threat than they do these neutered dogs. Okay, now, you're worried about puppies? you can vasectomize the males. It'll cost the same as a neuter, but you can vasectomize the males. He'll still be a male. He'll still have all the desire to breed females and all that. And you can also do tubal ligation on the females. So you don't have to actually remove the gonads or make them no longer intact, okay? So there's ways to do that. Mob stock consolidates sheep, and it makes the guard dogs a lot more effective, as I just pointed out. Lambing is possible in a mob stock situation. Now, if you have never done it and you're doing it for the first time, you're probably going to cull a few sheep, okay? I honestly, I was pasture lambing for about a decade before that, so I already had sheep used to giving birth out on pasture and counting to 2 or 3, whatever they needed to do. So I already had kind of a pre-selected flock, and I did not have any real serious problems with going to mob stock lambing, all right? But it's totally doable. I do have a whole system, that's a topic for another day, but I do have a lambing system for mob stock lambing. I call it lambing on the fly, but...
Is that because the moms don't know which babies are theirs and vice versa, or?
The problems?
Yeah.
The problems come about when the field gets pretty crowded with newborns and lambs are wandering about, and that some of it's genetic, some of it's management. A lot of it is feed management. This is actually a perfect scenario here. That ewe has lots of grass. She has no reason to move very far, okay? So she'll stay right there with her lambs. If you graze it down too short, that ewe has to move a great distance to feed her, fill her belly after she's lambed, and her lambs are going to get mixed up with other lambs. Okay, so a lot of it is just feed management. All right, use smaller paddocks and higher densities. Why? One of the reasons I was losing or lost so many lambs in that one situation was I had my sheep spread out far and wide. Some of them were in 20-acre paddocks. The dogs, my husband has seen this from the deer stand. Both coyotes and wolves will make a little noise. One of them will make a little noise in that far corner down there, while the others are coming around up here to ambush sheep. Okay? So the dogs are all busy down there, and they're picking your sheep off over here. When you get into a, say, 3-acre paddock, it's really hard for them to pull that trick off because your dogs can cover the whole field in just a, short sprint. So anyway, smaller paddocks. Okay, I'm just going to pass by this. I'll let you read it here while I take a drink, and then I'm going to pass by it. All right, use electrified netting, not strand fencing. I have seen too many coyotes, and I've even seen a couple of wolves zip right through strand fences. And the thing is, when they're airborne, they're not going to get a shock, okay? And also think about it. These animals are used to zipping through barbed wire fences all over the countryside. Okay, so they don't realize that fence could shock them anyway. But often they're like diving through it, so they're not even going to get a shock anyway. And that was the situation when I lost the 75 lambs there inside a strand fencing. And that's where I gathered up the 4 rolls of netting that I had. I had a love-hate relationship with netting all my life. I've learned how to be better than the netting. It really is a test of patience, that's at times for sure. But the netting, what it does is your predators most likely are going to try to go through it because that's what they're used to. And there's no way to go through that net without getting zapped on the nose. And I've even had the satisfying hearing a coyote go, you knew they just hit your net. Anyway, add deterrence. Now, we're assuming you just had a depredation, and you're not going to instantly gather a bunch of guard dogs if you don't have them, right? Okay, so there are some tools you could use. Flagery. The best way to describe flagery is, you know, the car sale lots used to have these ropes with all kinds of flags on them? That's what it looks like, okay? And so except they're longer strips. And let's just say you're calving or lambing, you could set up some flagery around a paddock, and that will deter wolves for about 30 days. They will figure out how to get through it, but it's going to take them about 30 days. And you know what? In 30 days' time, you could be done with lambing or calving, okay? And you can consolidate your animals better and do a better job, and maybe even find a guard dog to put in there. Know that if you're working with a highly suburbanized coyotes or dogs or wolves, it's not going to work so well. The light is, by the way, there's a thing called electronic shepherd. It flashes and it has a siren that goes off like every so often. And then there's another thing, a light thing that you put like on your corner post that looks like two red eyes that shine. That is a deterrent. But none of these things are going to work forever. These are just temporary stopgap measures. Remove all food. This is so important. Dead stock removal is always a big issue, and what to do with it. But here's the deal. I do not believe that a wolf or a coyote learns to kill your livestock because it ate a dead cow or a dead sheep. I don't think that's the case. But what they have observed, or wildlife people in Minnesota have observed, is that, in fact, they have a great slide of a dead cow, and there's a zillion tracks going to that dead cow. Well, if these animals are going to that dead cow for the next 4 months, what are they walking past? They're walking past your cow herd that whole time. So they're becoming intimately familiar with your cow herd while they're feeding on that dead cow. And I think that the way carcasses can lead to depredation is simply that they're drawing the predators to you and they're having them hang around. And quite honestly, our worst predator, like pressure, has come when a neighbor drug a horse or a cow out into the swamp. And then we have wolves or coyotes constantly traveling over to the neighbors, and they got to go over our place to get there. That is when we've had the most pressure from predators. Identify your predator. It's important to know what kind of animal you're dealing with. You know what? If they just killed one of your animals, I guarantee you that there's poop somewhere in the area, okay? Coyotes seem to like to poop up on high places, like on top of a log or on top of a rock. But look around, you almost surely, if they just ate 10 pounds of flesh, I guarantee you they took a dump somewhere nearby. So look for feces. It is a very good telling characteristic. Learn how to recognize feeding patterns, like what a wolf feeding pattern looks like versus a coyote. And one thing I'll tell you, and maybe the wildlife folks will go into this more, but you know, coyotes will chew the cartilage on the carcass of a mature animal, but they don't usually chew back the bones so far. So if you have a spine with all the ribs gone on an adult ewe, you might be looking at a wolf. And then, you know, look for tracks, hair on fences, that sort of thing. If you need to, remove the predator. And there are definitely situations where we need to remove that predator. You maybe don't have a livestock guard dog, and it's going to take you some time to get one. The other thing I should tell you is that, just say you picked up a 2-year-old dog somewhere. You know, it's going to take that dog over a month to get to feel like it's home. Okay? So it's not necessarily going to defend your animals for that first month because it doesn't feel like it's their animals. Some do immediately go to work, but there are plenty of dogs who need to like become a part of the farm before they're going to put their life on the line and chase off predators. Maintain a well-balanced adult guard dog population. And the reason I say this is because A real common sort of thing I hear is somebody has an 8, 9, 10-year-old guard dog, and that's been their sole guard dog all this while. And they suddenly start having problems. You know, by 8 years old, a lot of these dogs, their hearing isn't what it used to be, their vision isn't what it used to be. Maybe they're a little arthritic. I always say, you know what, these dogs are kind of like a man after 40. They realize suddenly that they're mortal, and they become more cautious. So, you know, you shouldn't have a population of dogs over 8 years old. You need some young, hot stuff in there to do the job. The old dogs can kind of hold down the fort, bring the pup up, teach the pup the rules, but you need some young, hot stuff out there. I would say 2 or 3-year-old dogs are going to do the majority of the work. And lastly, use an adequate number of guard dogs. And this is probably the biggest change in advice over the years. Is like I said, in the 70s and 80s when they were researching these dogs, the predator populations were really low. And one dog could, you know, back in the 80s, I remember we would only have one coyote on the farm, period. Nowadays, we typically have groups of 4, 5, or 6 coyotes together, hunting together. I don't know if that's whether the wolves have changed that behavior or what, but it definitely changes the needs of the number of dogs that we have. I'm going to tell you that most of a typical commercial farm should have at bare minimum 2, but 3 or 4 dogs is probably preferred. I'm going to also tell you that when you get past 3 or 4 dogs, management of the dogs so they don't try to kill each other gets to be a real problem, okay? So doggers, mostly because we're operating on 2 different farms, so I had to have set on each, do a stronger bond between that puppy and its livestock. If you raise 2 or 3 pups at a time, they're going to bond to each other and they're going to become a pack of dogs, but they're not necessarily bonded to the weaned lambs. Okay? I have become so convinced that the timing of bringing the puppy in is so important that I no longer produce litters of puppies any other time but in March or April, so that I have young lambs for those young puppies. The best puppies are the ones born under the feed bunk. Not necessarily literally, but what I'm trying to tell you is that from 4 to 16 weeks old, there's a window of socialization that opens up where that dog will bond to the animals that it lives with during that 4 to 16 weeks. After that time, those puppies, that window closes. Not suddenly, but it slowly closes in the 5th and 6th month. And that puppy will not develop the same bond as it does when it's younger. And this is so important because if you go on social media, there has been a big trend to raise these puppies in the house. And this is coming from people who are some other profession in their life. They're not farmers, and they can't imagine why you'd put this little puppy out in the field, okay? There's a whole lot of misinformation going on out there. And I just want to tell you that the best puppies are the ones that are with livestock from the beginning. Now, the first 4 weeks, they're kind of tiny. They can get stepped on or injured. Also, you don't want puppies that young outside because birds of prey will fly off with them, okay? Or coyotes will walk off with them, whatever. But like I said, I like to see this. Is the mother the best dog to raise the puppies? How many think so? I mean, once they're train them. There's another big trend that the puppies must be with the mother for 12 to 16 weeks. And I'm going to tell you that most livestock guard dog mothers are very permissive. And they will not teach that puppy to not play with the sheep, that sort of thing. They're not going to learn that from their mother. They're going to learn that from the sheep, okay? And when you have a mob of puppies that are 12, 14, 15, 16 weeks old in a pasture, they are going to overwhelm some sheep, okay? So while this worked, these are 10-week-old puppies, I think. These puppies all left for other homes shortly after this. But generally I say, no, you don't. You want to bring the puppy home about 8 weeks old while it's still in that bonding period. Is it okay to let my dog lick a newborn? I see so many people show a video or a picture of a dog licking off a newborn. No, you do not. And here's why. This dog, she was a lovely dog. She really did a good job, but she did like to help the mother with the babies. And then when she'd go somewhere else, the baby was bonded to her, and it would, this is exactly what's happening here. That lamb walks away with the dog. She also became a lamb hoarder, where she would, these now orphaned lambs, she would collect them in her doghouse and lay across the front door, you know, and there'd be a bunch of lambs in there. But anyway, I'm saying you do not want your dog to meddle with the newborns. The other reason is ewe lambs are more easily put off or frightened away, and they may leave their newborns with the dog. So you want the dog, and unfortunately I don't have a good picture of this, but the dog should be at least 30 feet away. Most dogs will sit there and watch a birth, but you want them to be at least 30 feet away. And if my dog is getting too close to the newborns, I come in with a crook and I slap it on the ground right in front of its nose, and I tell it to back off, because it does not belong in there helping with that birth. So this is a really well bonded, this has been my go-to lambing dog for a number of years. He's gone now. But JJ, he was just a terrific dog. And by the way, him and his partner Bonnie had quite a thing going. JJ would lure the coyote, and Bonnie would swing around and stalk the coyote from behind. I don't know if they ever caught one, because the kind of country they were doing this in was this stuff back here, and I never got to really, I never came across a coyote carcass, but they sure tried. Food aggression. This is an adult, this is JJ again. This is a pup, okay? This is part of the training. In this situation, I always have a crook on hand. I step in here. If that was his food, I'm going to slap the ground. I'd never touch the pup. Never touch the dog, okay? But I'm going to hit the ground and make this dog leave. More than likely, though, this is the puppy's food, and this dog's trying to steal it. That is always the case. Adult guard dogs are very greedy, and they don't care if the puppies all starve. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dogs in this picture. I achieved this because I spend 10 minutes every day at feeding time as a lunchroom monitor, okay? And there's so much they're learning from this, because they're also learning to never challenge a person over food. So your children can walk in there and any of these dogs will leave their pile of food because your toddler just walked up to them. Safety, okay? If you don't manage this feeding time, then you're gonna wind up with a big brawl, for one, and you're gonna have some dogs that just aren't getting the feed they need. Behavior problems. Wool, this is wool pulling. Can you see the little tufts of wool? Okay, a dog has been messing with this sheep. You want to intervene as soon as you see something like this. You don't want to wait for the torn ears or the chewed legs or whatever, okay? It's a fact that a certain portion of dogs are going to go through what we call the juvies, and that's from 8 months to 18 months old. They're just like 16-year-old, 18-year-old kids, okay? They're going to get a little wild. They're going to be a little stupid. I tell people, just because your teenager put the car in the ditch doesn't mean they'll never learn how to drive, okay? Same thing here. Just because the dog is screwing up a little bit doesn't mean they won't turn out to be a good dog. A lot of people want to give up at this stage. Here's a few things you can do. This is called a dangle stick, piece of pipe or board. I like pipe because a lot of dogs will chew up a 2x4. So I like a piece of pipe, but here's a couple other things. I have actually abandoned the dangle stick, and I've gone to, this is a piece of log chain, and then a shorter, lighter chain with a snap for the collar. This will slide through everything. If the dog decides to go through a V-shaped tree trunk, he's not going to get stuck. Okay, I haven't got a chain get stuck yet. This is what I call the angel maker.
Oh my goodness.
That dog is, this is when he's like 18 months old. And actually, his behavior was not wrong. He was just obsessive about rounding up sheep anytime there was a threat. And he just got to the point where the sheep didn't get to graze all night because he kept them holed up in a corner. Sometimes the threat could be you moved something, object, into a place it's never been before, and he won't let them near it. But it was getting a little bit out of hand, okay? He wasn't injuring sheep or anything like that, but his behavior was a bit out of hand. But he was so big that chain meant nothing to him. So I would prefer that this actually be a round circle, and there's no way he can chase animals with that. And the bouncers are coming, so I got 0 minutes. Okay, I think I got just a couple slides here. Everybody winds up with one of these dogs. She's looking at me like, all right. Couple of technology you can use. This is a Tritronic 70 shock collar combined with, the tracking collars have gotten very expensive. Garmin wants $1,000 for a pair of collars and a tracking device. There's a trucking company called Lone Star Tracking, makes a yabby or oyster, talk to the salespeople, $135. Okay? And it goes to your cell phone. And here's a dog that was chasing coyotes up a ditch. And I zapped her right here, and she never did it again. Housing, make sure you know your state laws. Our state requires that we have housing, but look what the dog prefers. Chickens, I'm just going to say some dogs are chicken dogs, some aren't. Okay? That's the end.